Crystal Palace means there's only one guy coming into the hot seat on Hammers Chat, Dan, also, and better known as HLTCO over on Twitter and all social media platforms. Dan, how is oneself?
I'm good, mate. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm looking forward to this game, actually. This game was 2-3 weeks ago. I wouldn't be looking forward to it, but I am. So it's a nice change. It's good to feel positive and fun about football. But I want to go back to the start of the season because when we played you, it was the second match of the season. But just as a reminder, what were your hopes and expectations for Crystal Palace before a ball was kicked in the Premier League season?
Well, I think, it's obviously caveated or was caveated by the loss of Michael Elise and the fact that we were still adapting to a defence that, wasn't going to have Joachim Andersen in it. I can't remember when we last spoke whether or not Maxence Lacroix had played or not. But obviously, he's been a huge positive for us in terms of the back line. And it really feels in the last, 2 to 3 months as though we've started to turn a corner. I think going into this game, we've got one Premier League defeat in 10. If we avoid defeat against yourselves, it will be 7 unbeaten away from home, which will be a record for us in the Premier League. So all is pretty well at the moment in terms of the squad and the general performances. So yeah, I'm pretty positive.
But the season took a little while to get going for you. Winless in the first 8 games. A, why was that? And B, were you ever concerned?
It's obviously very easy with the benefit of hindsight to say, oh, we always knew we were going to be fine. There were times when you start to wonder if we were going to get dragged further towards the relegation battle. There's now an 8-point buffer there. But the reason I think for it, in a simplistic way as I can possibly do it, because you don't want to speak to me for 2 hours about Palace and the intricacies, but Oliver Glasner is very big on system and tactics and making sure that his players understand exactly what he wants in every single phase. And he said many times, not just, in the 8-game run, but ever since, really, that with Eddie Nketiah and Trevor Chalobah coming in right at the back end of the window, with Mateta coming back from the Olympics and still getting up to speed, I think he had 3 or 4 days training before the first game of the season, with Michael Elise leaving, with Anderson going and a change to the back line. I mean, if you look at the central defensive trio, obviously Trevor Chalobah's gone back now to Chelsea. Maxence Lacroix was new into the league at 24, coming from the Bundesliga. So you've got 2 changes there. There was just a lot of upheaval. And I think from his point of view as manager, he knew it was going to take time to sort of ride the waves. And without the creative influence of Michael Elise, without the driving force in the middle of the field that Adam Wharton offers, because he's had this groin issue that he's been struggling with for months now, we've had to find a new way of playing. And he's done that. Players like Will Hughes and Jefferson Lerma have really risen. You've got John-Philippe Mateta back in goal-scoring form. The defence is solid. And I think we all know that if Roy Hodgson had the same squad, we probably wouldn't have had the results and certainly wouldn't have had the quality of football that we've seen. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy overall.
Were you always sort of behind Glasner throughout the 8 games? I mean, I don't know how to guess it really, unless you live in it as a Crystal Palace fan. It's impossible to know how it feels. But does having sort of faith in him as a coach allow you to see out that tough times, if you like, 8 because 8 games, especially the first 8 games as well, I think that's the worst period you could go without picking up a win, because like you said, you're seeing other teams picking up points. You're thinking, when are we going to get up and running? And then, like you said, you start thinking, you must be thinking, are we going to be in a relegation battle this season? So did you ever wane from your support in Glasner, or were you always confident he would turn it around?
Well, I think, and obviously I can't speak for every neutral fan, but there were plenty who were saying, see, I told you, flash in the pan, it was just new manager bounce at the end of last season. It was never going to sustain. But I think you will know, as a West Ham fan, there are certain things you see from coaches where you can see the foundations and the building blocks regardless of the results. And obviously, certain people are more minded to be long-term thinkers than others. But the football we are playing and have played throughout Oliver Glasner's time in charge has always had a higher base, shall we say, than what Roy Hodgson offered. I've said it many times. I think in Roy's world, he would have settled for 38 0-0s, whereas Oliver Glasner, as much as it sounds like a cliche, he tries to win every single game of football. And that, as a fan, is always pleasing. We came out second half against Leicester on Wednesday, having not played well in the first 45, but he'd clearly put a bit of a rocket up at them, and we ended up getting the 2 goals. It will be similar, I think, this weekend. I'm not suggesting that we will get a draw or 3 points, but we'll go into it trying to do that rather than trying to stifle you. And that is always positive as a fan, I think, because if you are in the middle pack of the Premier League and you know that you're not necessarily going to be pushing for European football or trophies, you at least want to go and watch a team that you can be infused by. And pretty much every week, Oliver Glasner gives you that. So, yeah, I was always fully behind him and believing that we would turn it around. But obviously, if it had gone on another 2 or 3 games and you're in a relegation battle 10 or 11 games in, then maybe the decision gets made by the board. But, yeah, I'm very glad that didn't happen and that we find ourselves in a solid position now.
In regards to the upturn in form, like you said, 1 loss in 10, is it just because players got used to Glasner, like you said, a new makeshift defence? It feels like Mateta's found his goal-scoring boots again as well. Is there any sort of special magic ingredient or turning point, or was it just patience, really?
I think the back 3 fully understanding one another was a huge thing. Maxence Lacroix has been fantastic from the moment he came in for me. But with Trevor Chalobah there on the right, Mark on the left, I think there was a real understanding between them. Similarly, Will Hughes has really kicked on this season. Obviously in an ideal world, you would have Adam Wharton and Chet Decore probably starting next to each other in the middle of the park. That hasn't been available to us. But Will Hughes has become he was always a bit of a cult hero anyway, but the definition of one this season. Everyone loves him. I think he would have a shout for Player of the Year if it was actually done right now. Obviously, getting the goals back from JP is a big thing. But even Ismail Assar, in terms of a replacement for Michael Elise, I think I said to you at the start of the season when we did the last one, it's impossible to replace a player of his quality. But Ismail Assar scored 2 goals at Brighton. He provided the assist for JP against Leicester to open the scoring the other night. He scored big goals for us, and he is an outlet on the right-hand side. So everything is sort of bubbled up quite nicely. And as a collective, really, there isn't one standout player or one particular tweak that's happened. And if you look at the number of draws we've had as well, there have been a number of games. Wolves away, we were probably comfortably the better team, could have won that. Newcastle at home, we scored an equaliser on 94 minutes, but we absolutely battered them in that game. So there were many opportunities for us to potentially get 3 points instead of 1, which obviously would put us closer to the top half. And if that was the case, then people are all of a sudden looking at us and thinking maybe there's an outside chance of European football. So I think the performance is, you don't go 1 defeat in 10 in the Premier League unless you've got a very solid foundation. And the hope is that, the remaining, 17 games of this season, we don't have to look over our shoulders at all.
At the moment, January transfer window, have you signed that player from Millwall?
He's having his medical as we speak, I believe.
Oh, okay, there you go then. So it would be too late to play again. Well, that's good then.
Yeah, he can't be registered for the game. No.
I'm glad about that. There was a little bit of me thinking, I don't want a Millwall player playing his first game for Palace against West Ham. I can see what the headlines are already. Have you done any other business, or is that your first?
Not as of yet. Obviously, Trevor going back is a bit of a spanner in the works because you sign someone on a season-long loan and you assume you've got them for the season. I believe that has been a decision that has been made by Chelsea out of a degree of spite because we have said they can't have Mark Gay back. And they've said, well, if you won't accept our offer for Mark Gay, we'll pull the string and take Trevor, which is very Chelsea, but it is what it is. I think we will go back into the market, but not for a right centre-back. Tyreek Mitchell, who has played pretty much every game for 3.5 years, touch wood without getting a single injury. He just needs a bit of competition and backup, really. So there's a player, his name's Juve. He plays for Slavia Prague. He's 19. I think we're going to try and get that deal over the line. But I think there's a potential of him going on strike to force that through. So it might take another week or 2. And other than that, I don't expect us to be that active in the market. But at the same time, I don't think January is really a time when you should be doing major surgery to your squad. I think those 2 players would be satisfactory for Oliver Glasner, really.
Yeah, to be fair, there's some clubs as an outsider I look at, and I wonder how those fans feel, because obviously last year you got Adam Wharton in January, didn't you? So
and Daniel Munoz as well.
Yeah, so you've got a bit of evidence that actually you can bring in good talent in the January transfer window. It's like Aston Villa brought in Morgan Rogers. So if I was like a Villa fan, I'd think, hey, you got lined up for us this January. Whereas historically, we've had Jesse Lingard, and then we've had Thomas Souček and Jared Bowen in 2020, but we're in a relegation battle then. But apart from that, we've had Danny Ings and Calvin Phillips, so it's not too spectacular from the West Ham side of it.
But then I suppose if you look at it from a summer window, how many people said you won the transfer window, and yet up until now you haven't had the season you were hoping for? So I think sometimes people can get a little bit carried away with the individual names rather than the way the squad as a whole looks. And maybe, the January window is certainly not a time to put too much store by it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because when we did like our Liverpool preview, I was saying, well, actually, a lot of people have thought they've had a poor window because they haven't signed anyone. We could argue it's a good window because they've not needed to sign anyone.
The
It's like, well,
continuity there.
yeah, our squad's complete. We don't need to buy anyone. We're just going to carry on as it was, and that's it's good. Whereas if you're having to bring in 9 players,
it's going to be a teething period of like Eddie Nketiah, for example, came in from Arsenal, £30 million. Everyone would have assumed he'd have hit the ground running. He hasn't scored a Premier League goal yet. Now, there are reasons for that, but you can look at that in the isolated Eddie Nketiah Arsenal goal scorer and think, good, £30 million, no goals in January, bad. So it's just a case of realising the bigger picture, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, right. Anyway, from your team to my team, what do you make of West Ham?
It's a very difficult one with Graham Potter because I am unsure at this stage. I know you got the win against Fulham, but I think everyone, whether you're partisan or neutral, would say they gave you 2 of those goals on a plate, really. I do wonder whether or not your fan base will have the patience for his style of football. And I only say this as a Palace fan who has obviously paid close attention to Graham Potter during his time at Brighton, because if you look at the progress that they made under him, it was there and it was tangible. It's why he got the Chelsea job in the first place. But it was, I would suggest, a bit more glacial than what you would hope for. I don't think his football is going to revolutionise you overnight, shall we say. Undeniably will be different to Lopetegui and a shift from what you were used to under David Moyes. But it might take 12 to 18 months to fully realise it. And I just question whether or not a fan base in the modern game who are looking to get back towards the European places quite quickly will actually be satisfied by that.
Do you think then, let's flip that around a little bit and assume the patience was there, do you think he would become a success at West Ham in 12 to 18 months' time?
I do, yeah. I think, Brighton fans, in terms of my experience of the way they viewed him, particularly when he left for Chelsea, obviously there was a lot of bad blood there. They felt as though Roberto De Zerbi went in there and sort of supercharged the sort of direction of travel that he had Brighton on. If you're thinking of it in metaphor terms, rather than going up a staircase, they went on an escalator. But obviously, Roberto De Zerbi went in like a firework, went bang, and then fizzled out and ended up moving to Marseille. Whereas if Graham Potter hadn't moved to Chelsea from Brighton, then maybe he'd still be there now and they would have moved from finishing 9th to 7th. So I do think he will be a success. I think if you look at your relative budget compared to theirs, the size of your fan base, the pedigree, the expectation from the board as well as the fans, I think he can be, and his style of football would suit you. I'm just not sure that it's not even West Ham fans in isolation. It's fans across the game generally. I think because we're all on our smartphones all the time, we're all desperate for news of this. We're all desperate to see our team win every week. I debate whether or not Graham Potter's football is satisfactory in many people's minds when you are looking for sort of the dopamine hit of 3 points every weekend.
Yeah, I do understand where you're coming from, and especially like the patience thing. I think one thing when you were saying all that, the one defense I have, or to come back at you with to some extent, is, or justify why I think there will be patience, is because I think Lopetegui brought the bar down so low. I feel like if Potter came in,
that bad? Was it?
Honestly, Dan, it was horrible. And do you know how you spoke about, the performances were there under Glasner, the results weren't there, but you had confidence. And I think I can't remember what you said, but his core was higher than Hodgson. I think was that the phrase you used?
Yeah, the bar was lower under Roy than it is.
Yeah, well, Lopetegui's bar was low
in the basement.
Yeah, we would around about the Christmas period. We had 4 games. We beat Wolves, drew to Bournemouth, drew against Brighton, and then we beat Southampton. So 8 points from 12. And I was genuinely struggling to be happy because the performances were terrible. We won, but I didn't have that elation of a victory. Do you know? Yeah, you must have.
Oh no! Look, yeah. I can fully. The Roy Hodgson era of Crystal Palace is this because, And it's slightly different, although it's probably actually worse for you, because people go, what do you expect? You're Palace. What do you expect? You're West Ham. You are where you are. But people don't realise when you support an Arsenal or a Manchester United or a Manchester City, you are in the running by definition for trophies every single year. So it's a prerequisite to the conversation. With clubs like ours, if you aren't enjoying going, like, whether it's a home game or an away game, say it's an away game, so you're playing Southampton 2:00 on a Sunday, you turn the TV on. Then this was my experience under Roy Hodgson. I didn't even want to watch it. You're turning up out of a sense of duty on your own sofa, and that is a debilitating thing, because you win and it's like whatever. You lose and it's like, why have we still got to deal with this? And that is something that you can't fully explain to people outside of the bubble of your fan base, and then you sound entitled and spoiled and everything else. So,
amen. I think you've absolutely nailed that, because I think when at the minute where both these teams are right now, we're both looking up, Dan. We're both looking at that top half, thinking, hello, can we decrease those points and can we get into the top half? But at the minute, when you don't have much going for you except what you see for 90 minutes, because you're probably not going to get European football, you're probably not going to get relegated. Well, there's still just under half the season to go. So how are you going to enjoy that, Abel? By what you witness on the football pitch? Because if it ain't the end achievement, because it's not possible, then you're going to want to enjoy your 90 minutes on Saturday. And I don't know you're a subscriber to this notion, but football's an escape from real life. Football is 90 minutes where you forget about your money, what is your family, what is your work, whatever. You forget about it. You enjoy it. You have 90 minutes a week where you can just switch off, enjoy it. And then full-time whistle goes, you go back to real life and it hits you. But if you're not enjoying that 90 minutes, it becomes part of your troubles to some extent.
And it actually adds to it in many senses, because it's the escape that you had. It's not like going to the cinema and watching a film. If you went to watch a film that was terrible every week, you'd stop going to the cinema. But you're not going to stop supporting West Ham or Palace. That's the thing. It's like you put yourself through the ringer emotionally, you pay handsomely to do so. And if you aren't going to see wins, I mean, I used to say it all the time with Palace, you obviously don't expect wins. It's not part of the reason why you would support a club like ours. But even if you're not going to be playing free-flowing, attractive football, you want to see a team with some balls. You want to see a team that are going to leave it out there. If you're not seeing either one of those things, then what's the point, ultimately?
Yeah. I completely agree. Anyway, let's take a look at Saturday then. West Ham Palace at London Stadium. How are you feeling ahead of this one? How do you see it going?
Well, I mean, I said on Wednesday morning prior to the game at Leicester that there was a sense of trepidation in me, because the home fans would have been up for it, and you've got to be on your mettle, and yet we came away from that with a 2-0 victory. So I'm by nature a pessimistic person before games, partly because of the way social media is and you don't want to fall on your sword, partly because it's just inbuilt, I think, with Crystal Palace that eventually, you will be miserable and you're not allowed to enjoy things. But the 8-point buffer that we've now built on the bottom three does give that degree of comfort. I mean, I was literally looking at the table last night before I went to bed and thinking, probably only going to need 34 points to stay up. And we've got 24 already. So, if we can't get 10 points in our remaining 17 games, I'd be stunned. And that does give you a bit of a pause for thought and comfort there. So I'm going into it optimistic. I think if we get back-to-back wins away from home and then go into a game next weekend at home to Brentford with those 6 points in our back pocket, then everyone can start to really look forward to the rest of this season, a potential cup run and everything else. But ultimately, as much as it sounds pessimistic, I suppose, if we can get a draw at least and extend that unbeaten run away from home to 7, then it really does show everyone, whether they are Palace fans or neutrals, that Oliver Glasner has cracked the conundrum, as it was. Because it's my personal contention that Crystal Palace will not get a better coach, at least in the next 5 or 10 years, than Oliver Glasner. We shouldn't really have him in the first place. The man won a Europa League with Eintracht Frankfurt. You were as part of that competition in that very season. So full well how they perform. We have no real right to have him in the dugout. And I just want to sort of ride this wave for as long as possible and see where he can take us, really.
As always, time for the score prediction. So crystal ball out, Dan, what are you going to go for?
I already do a thing with my mates anyway, so I put 1-1 down for this. I never, as you know, I'll never predict Palace to lose a game. I don't want to predict us to go to London Stadium and win because of the new manager bounce and everything else. So I'll say 1-1. And to be honest, I think it's a pretty solid shout anyway.
Well, we've got a full house, Dan. We obviously do our preview separate. Myself and Gonzo do our preview of every game. We both said 1-1. You've said 1-1. And I do this opposition fan preview for every single game, and very, very rarely do we have a full house. Probably possibly twice a season. Do all three of us pick?
Which means it's definitely not finishing 1-1.
It means it's definitely finishing 1-1. But Dan, thank you so much. A pleasure as always. One of my favourite guests to have on. So thank you. You guys at home have enjoyed it and you want to hear and see more from Dan, I'll put the links to his social media and Patreon in the description below. As a subscriber to Dan's Patreon, I can recommend it. It's not just Crystal Palace stuff. There's non-Palace stuff on there as well for the football fan. It's into just generic football chit-chat. So I'll put the link to his Patreon on there. So it comes from a personal recommendation from me. Dan hasn't asked me to promote Patreon. He's probably a bit embarrassed right now, but as a consumer, I'm promoting it for him. Links in description below. But thank you very much for joining us. Please do drop a like on the video by clicking thumbs up. Subscribe. You have a chat with myself and Dan. Catch you in a bit.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.